Hello everyone, I'm Chris Plowman with JaiCrispy. JaiCrispy is a software development firm creating tailor-made business applications for web, mobile, and SharePoint, and we're especially adept at integrating with back-end systems like SAP, so we can do a lot of business integration services. You can find out a lot more about us on the web at www.jaicrispy.com. That's JaiChrispy. In today's video, I'm going to be showing you how to do a simple farm install of SharePoint 2013. You might wonder why a developer would need to know how to do a SharePoint installation, since a lot of times that's seen as more of an IT infrastructure or administration kind of role. Well, a lot of times as developers, we'll need to create at least a simple farm in order to do a proof of concept for a customer, or just to set up a development environment so that we can test creating a SharePoint app that we might want to release to the App Store, the marketplace. Or if we're developing web parts or something like that, we want to have a place where we can test, put those parts up for debugging. So this video will not go through all the intricate details of configuring services the way you might want to in a large-scale organization to really customize them to your specific needs, but it will go through a very general overview of the install. We'll kind of take the boilerplate stuff, and usually that's all you need really to get going and start doing development against it. So a few things that I've already set up, so in order to follow along with the video you will need to have these things in place as well. I've already configured an Active Directory that we'll use for the demo, and I also have a SQL Server that's already installed. I'll be using 2014, but the steps will be the same regardless of what supported version of SQL Server you're using. And then of course you'll need a machine to install the SharePoint installation on, whatever's going to be your SharePoint server. Of course, if you had multiple servers, the install is pretty much the same as you run it on your additional instances. You would just choose the add to existing farm option that you'll see as we go through the install. I would try and recommend that you give the SharePoint server some decent resources, probably at least 4 or 5 gigs of RAM if you can. SharePoint server can eat up quite a bit of memory, so that's something to be aware of. If you start having some weird problems where things are not going properly and you're not getting very clear error messages, one thing to look at is your memory. If you're only running with maybe say 2 gigs, that's probably not going to be enough. You might run into some issues. So something to be aware of. So without any further ado, let's do the actual install and show you how this thing gets set up. So the first thing I'm going to do is set up the user accounts that I'm going to need throughout the SharePoint install. So you'll see here I have the Active Directory computer open, and not to get confused, I have it open in a remote connected session. So if you see there's sort of a window and then a background window, I'm running an AD in Hyper-V. So I kind of did that so you'd be able to see that it's an Active Directory. It's called JC81, and you see up at the top. But just don't get confused by the visualization and how there's 2 Windows start buttons. So first I'll create an account for my SQL Server. I'll go to Users, New User, and I'm just going to give it a name of SQL Server, and the login will be SQL. And then I'll give it a password. And then one thing I'm going to do here also is I'm not going to allow the user to change the password. You have options for this in SharePoint. It has some cool features where it can actually manage account passwords, but for this sample I'm not going to use that. So we'll just click through that. So now we have a SQL account. Next up, we're going to repeat this for a couple more accounts. So now I'm going to create a SharePoint account. And this will be our SharePoint farm account, and I'll call this SP farm. And then the same thing, I'll give it a password, and I'm not going to allow the actual account to have its password change, and the password won't expire. Okay, the next account that I'm going to set up will be for the SharePoint admin account. This is the account that we're going to use to do the install, and I'll call it SP admin. And again, the same thing with the passwords. I'm not going to have the user change the password at login, and this particular user will not be able to change the password for these service accounts. Now for this account, I'll create an account for the SharePoint services. You could definitely break this out and be much more granular, but for this we're just going to create one account that all the services can run under. You can create an account per service or break them out however makes sense in your organization. And that's it, we have the accounts we need. Okay, so now I've jumped over to the SQL Server machine. And I'm going to go in and I want to configure it to actually use that account that I created earlier. So I'll go over to the SQL Server 2014 Configuration Manager and I'm going to open that up. And let me make these just a little bit wider so that you can read them. Okay, for the SQL Server, that's the first thing I'm going to change. So I'm going to make that run under that domain account that I created. So I'll go to Properties. I'm going to browse for the account. I'll change my location to be my domain. And we just called that SQL. So SQL, check name, everything's good. So we'll say OK. And now I need to just give it a password. So that's the password that I set up. Apply. And it's going to be restarted, that's fine. We can say OK. So now that one's done. Now let's do the same thing for the agent account. So again, look at the location, change it to my directory, and I'll search for the SQL account. Okay. Put the password in again. Apply. And now that one's set up. Now the only other thing I want to do while I'm here is this is still set to run under manual mode. I'm just going to change it to be automatic so that I don't have to worry about it. If I do want to run something with the agent, it'll be ready to go. And finally, right now the agent is stopped, so I'll start it. There we go, it's running. Alright, so now I'm jumping over to my SharePoint machine and I'm going to go into Computer Management, Local Users and Groups, click on Groups, and then I can go to Administrators, right click, and say Add to Group. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to add my SharePoint admin domain account to the local administrators group. So that was the SP admin account. Add that one in. And we can say OK. So that's it for adding it to the group on SharePoint. Now let me switch over so you can go back to Hyper-V here, and I'm going to connect to my SQL Server machine. Let me just log in, and you'll see right now I'm using my account, the Chris account. And I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to go into Computer Management, Local Users and Groups, Groups, Administrators, right click, Add to Group, and then same thing, SP admin. And then I actually want to go into the SQL Server Management Studio and I want to set up this login as well. So I'll go into Security, Logins, and I can right click on Logins and create a new one. And I'll just search for the name. I'm going to change to my domain accounts. and search again for SPAdmin. Remember, SPAdmin is going to be our installation account. So now that I have that on there, I'll switch over to server roles, and it's going to need to be able to be a database creator, so DB creator, and also security admin. Say OK there. And now we should be all set. So one other thing while I'm in Management Studio is I'm going to go to the server and select Properties, go to Advanced, and there's something called Max Degree of Parallelism. We need to set that to 1. Okay, so now I've jumped over to my SharePoint machine and I'm actually logged in as that SPAdmin account, and we're going to start the actual installation. So I copied the foundation installer to the desktop and I'm just going to start that up. And we're going to choose Install Software Prerequisites. So we're not quite ready for the full install yet, but we're getting close. So this is a quick wizard. Next, accept the licensing. Next. And then it runs for a little while. I'm speeding it up quite a bit for the video, so we can run through it. But it's all just next, 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 and it runs through and installs a bunch of things for you. Finally, it's done. You can say finish, and we'll restart. Okay, so as our SharePoint finishes its prereqs, it'll restart a few times. The prep tool will automatically start running, and then we can go ahead and run our actual install. So as I fire this up, now I'm choosing the installation option instead of the prereqs. I'll accept the licensing agreement, continue, and here's that option where you have either standalone or complete. Complete is the farm installation. That's what we're going to do. So we'll say install now. It'll run through some things. I've sped up some of the processes that take a while for the video, just so that we're not sitting here looking at progress bars. But some of this stuff does take a little while, so be patient. So once the install is done, we're going to get a prompt to launch the configuration wizard. We'll do that. And the first screen tells us we're going to need to know, our database name and the usernames and stuff. And remember, we're running this under the SPAdmin. We've logged in and we're running all this installation is all under the SPAdmin account. We'll allow it to restart as needed, and we're going to say we're creating a new server farm. If we're running on a secondary instance or whatever, then we could connect to our existing farm. Then we're going to have to specify our database settings. So you'd put in whatever your database server is. Here, mine's just JC SQL 14. I'm leaving the database name as SharePoint config, and then I'll put in that SP farm account is the username and its password that we're going to run this under. Then we have a passphrase for the farm, so that can be whatever you want it to be. And then we're going to choose where what port our central admin site runs under. By default, it creates a port. A lot of times I want to change this to something that is more convenient for me to remember, but it can be whatever you want. It doesn't really matter. And then we can launch it, and the configuration will run for a little while. Sped it up here, but once it's done, we just say finish, and that's it. So once that's done, our SharePoint admin site will come up. I'll go ahead and say that I'll participate in the improvement program, and then we get to the main configuration section. And like I said, I'm going to use the wizard to configure this. Like I said, if you wanted to do something more in depth, you could use PowerShell and configure all the services. First thing we have is a service account, and you'll see the only managed account that's in here right now is the farm account. We don't want to use that. We're going to use that service account that we set up earlier. So I'll put in that username and password for the SP services that we created in the domain. And there we go. And then if you're running the full SharePoint, you're going to have a lot more services here, but since this is Foundation, we just have a few. And then working on it is Microsoft code for this will take a very long time, so get used to seeing that and having it run for a while. That's it for this initial configuration. Alright, our final step, create a site collection. So this is going to be our very root site collection, so I'm just going to call it Portal. And of course, you can go through and create more site collections. You can create the paths and things that you want. We get to choose a template. We have a couple different options, so we can see what's in the enterprise. We don't have anything in the custom because we haven't created any yet. I'm just going to leave it at team site for this one and say OK. And then it'll run off and create my first site collection. And remember the Microsoft code. Working on it means this will take a long time. So that's it for the farm configuration wizard. So we can open up our portal in another tab, and eventually this thing will finish and we'll be able to see our main central admin. Here we go. And on the other side we can see our default portal page. And you can go in and create more site collections, manage paths, and do all the things that you need. So I hope this was helpful. So now you should have everything you need to be able to run your own farm. Thank you so much.